knowing.
All right, man. Welcome to Crow 777 Radio, episode 215. It'll be a Thursday main show. We have an exciting show today. We covered Walter Russell recently. And by the way, Jason Lindgren is with me. And from the Russell Museum, that is the Walter Russell Museum, there is a foundation because his work was so important. Matt Presti is here with us today, who is the director of the museum. If I make mistakes in the things I'm laying down here, Matt, you can correct me in a moment. Anyhow, welcome, Jason.
Good morning, Crow.
Do we have anything, or are we jumping in?
We are jumping headlong into the fray.
All right. A couple episodes ago, and I will give you the number. It would be 211, episode 211, which is titled Mind Creates Reality and Emotion is the Color and Fuel of That Creation. We covered ideas about Walter Russell. On the episode image down in the lower left, there's a quote from Russell. And in a way, that one quote almost sums up a way you could think about the work that he did. And to be perfectly fair, I've studied a lot of Eastern philosophy from all over the world. And it almost appears to me at this point that we have people that become illuminated at some level, and they're trying to describe how they got there and what they learned to the culture that they're speaking to. Anyhow, welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Crow. Appreciate it.
Did I get all that right when I introed you?
Yeah, I'm currently president of the University of Science and Philosophy, which was formerly the Walter Russell Foundation.
Okay, so is that the actual title of the university?
Correct.
And where is it?
We're located in Waynesboro, Virginia.
Okay, so let's jump in here. As I have stated a few times in shows, I'll state it here again. I had been challenging everything. Some years ago, I came to understand that electricity is the only force in our world, and by proxy, electromagnetism. I think Walter Russell calls it the daughter of electricity. It was maybe a year after that I bumped into the Universal One, and my jaw dropped open. Here's a man describing what I could not yet describe, but I was pretty reasonably positive that I had deduced correctly. The way I got there is I started to take all the systems that make energy in our world, and I realized you can't run any of them without electricity. That's how I started to get there. But where would you like to start if we're going to give people an overview, a primer, a way to become familiar with Walter Russell's work?
Sure. Walter Russell was an illuminate. He had a 39-day illumination in what is known in East and West mystic study circles as the light. So in that illumination experience, he wrote down some 39,000 words with nary a correction and hundreds of charts and drawings, which he was bid to deliver to the world of science. And so he prepared his first manuscript to the world of science over a 7-year period, again, a command from that experience. And he released from 1921 his experience. In 1927, he released to the world of science 1,000 volumes of his magnum opus, the Universal One, to the world of science. And in his own words, he said basically that science laughed at it, scoffed at it, and threw it into the wastebasket. There were several people that were profoundly touched by the book, its implications. He had, of course, had the New York Times op-ed exchanges with several different prominent physicists during that time, one of which ended up affirming that his new ideas were to be taken seriously and that he wasn't a crank or a crackpot, as he first was called out by several physicists of the day. So Nikola Tesla being one who wrote to Walter and bid that he lock his work up in a sepulcher for 1,000 years because mankind was not ready for it. So basically, Walter Russell was an illuminate, a mystic, modern-day mystic of the day. I like to refer to him as a three-dimensional alchemist. He took the circle and the square and brought it into the cube and the sphere. He laid out a seamless cosmology that was perfectly in tune and in concert with nature, the human body and all bodies. And he basically gave the big toe theory that Thomas Campbell talks about to the world of science back in the late 20s and early 30s. So he was a pioneer. He was also a self-taught artist. He mastered all the 5 fine arts with only a 4th grade education. And that would be architecture, music, poetry, painting, and sculpting, as well as he received 11 conferred degrees, one a doctorate of science for his work on the transuranium elements and the discovery or the prediction of heavy water, which he gave to a group of scientists, some 400 scientists in California during a lecture in the 30s. Of course, he got no credit for that. We do have letters where he wrote to the Nobel Prize Committee asking for posthumous recognition. They never did authorize that, of course, or he would be much more well known. So aside from demonstrating in his life what he called the power of working knowingly with God or the Creator or the universal intelligence, again, I should disclaim that basically in Russell science, Russell philosophy, you have many references to the Creator, and the Russells were very fluent on what God, Creator, is. So they included many more words than you would generally get in a description from, say, Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or something like that. Basically, God is that universal intelligence. It's consciousness itself. Man should progress from God 1.0 to God 2.0. You know, we need to upgrade our conscious knowledge concerning God and what it is. So don't let the term offset your understanding. Seek to marry different words with it. You know, like silence, stillness, equilibrium, oneness, the all, you know, terms like this that basically will upgrade your understanding of what it is and how it works in the life of man. And so what he was able to do was demonstrate moment-to-moment connection to that divinity within himself. And that's what their home study course was written about, is how to attain that moment-to-moment connection, so that all you do, you're working with the divine and putting absolute power into your creative abilities, supercharging your own creative abilities and unfolding the genius that lies dormant within you. And that's basically the entire philosophy that the Russells taught. And then the science is a natural science, which culminates in the understanding of the true cosmological origins in nature and continuative cycles of repetition of light waves that occur in the universe and how it works and how we can work with it. So just a brilliant man overall. He's very little known. It's an honor for me to be able to serve as president of the University of Science and Philosophy in that capacity to promote his teachings and to, you know, continue the study of the science and furthering possible scientific breakthroughs, which we're having some real great success with, albeit at a slow pace. It's not easy to unfold and unpack the work of a man like this. So just, you know, a great honor to continue on in the tradition of former presidents and administrations of this university, this esteemed institution. And I'm happy to join you today, Crow. So thanks.
Yeah, it's, you know, just from episode 211, we got a number of people more to take a look at Russell. I know Jason even went out and grabbed the Universal One, but what's ironic about what you were talking about is go figure, you know, Western science won't accept anything from an illuminated man. Maybe if he was illuminated with a black light, they'd have been more apt to go with him. It goes to show the kind of almost religious nature of what passes for science in our age, where everything is theoretical. And I've said so many times, a theory is just a damn idea. And if a theory is very old, it's not that great an idea, because that means this idea can't be proven over a period of time to be something more than just an idea or a theory. And it's almost become the totality of scientific learning in our era. But Russell, he's the exact opposite of that idea of this kind of theoretical existence we find ourselves in. But when you get the Universal One, the book Universal One by Walter Russell, one of the things you'll notice is there are hand-drawn, I'm not going to call them schematics, I guess you could maybe, but they're diagrams to help you visualize and understand what it is he's attempting to describe. But they are so uniform from the first one in the front of that book to the last one. They marry idea to idea to idea, re-echoing what's already been laid down. And it's really quite a thing when you come across that first diagram, because at first you're thinking, how do I make heads or tails out of this? And then you begin to realize, I believe in too much complicated nonsense. I got to start simplifying. As Jason, before we came on the air, Jason said it's almost like binary in a way, not synthetic though. When we say binary, we think synthetically. But there's another book that I got later, and I'm trying to remember. Is it the Divine Light? Is that the correct title?
That would be The Message of the Divine Iliad, and that was centering around his 39,000 words. That's what he referred to those words as, the Message of the Divine Iliad, which is, of course, the story, basically the words he wrote down during that 39-day period of illumination.
So he's using the ancient idea of the Iliad to kind of illustrate the journey that he had. But we should point out that in every major religion in the world, there have been illuminated people. And for the most part, I don't think we know very many of their names in this part of the world. So it's quite a thing to consider that maybe a human being did reach illumination. And in Christianity, this might be the idea of heaven, and Eastern traditions, enlightenment, nirvana. There's all these other words and other cultures that try to describe the elevation of the human mind to that level, kind of free of illusion, in the clear light, being able to see definitively. And that's really what is claimed to have happened here. But what's more is everything we read from the man is based on that experience, right?
Yeah, and may I just clarify too that inspiration is according to the Russells a minor illumination, and I'm sure you've been inspired. We've all been inspired. So this is a very practical spirituality. It's a very practical philosophy. They called it a living philosophy because they knew that there were many dead philosophies out there. But the living philosophy is, to the degree that you are aware of the centering light within you is to the degree that you can express that to the outward world, and how few people are aware of that inner light and their own potential power for creativity. And so we're given the apps, we're given the smartphones, we're given the booze, the drugs, we're given the ding, ding, dings at all the casinos, the blinking lights, the flashing lights, the Six Flags and Disneyland and endless Hollywood production after Hollywood production, all things that take away our attention from the inner light. And so basically, as a practical philosophy and spirituality, as I like to call it, the power of understanding that even to the small degree of you being inspired is an illumination experience. And we often think that illuminants are untouchable, that we can never be there, so we might as well just become cult followers and read their words as if they were the words of God himself, when what the Russells are teaching is that you have all that power within you, and that even a little inspiration is to be considered an illumination, because it's giving you that light. That inner light is the inspiration. That's the still small voice of the Creator speaking to you. And it would behoove us to learn to listen to that still small voice, which is our inner power. In much the same way, in dangerous situations, as Nikola Tesla was quoted, that's when he would receive these flashes of light, as well as very inspired situations. So those flashes of light, as many people, even regular everyday people who wouldn't otherwise be thought of as illuminates, we all have the ability to illuminate within ourselves. And, to be very clear, I don't mean to refer to illumination as Illuminati. In fact, I like to refer to those people as deluminates.
There you go.
Or
that's appropriate.
Yep.
The deluminati, because they're not illuminated at all, trying to control and off 7 point something billion of your own fellow man is not a very illuminated kind of approach to getting humanity to the stars, in my humble opinion. But so illumination itself is something that we can all strive for. You'll know you're close to it when you have a feeling of inspiration. And as Russell would say, the mistake that so many people make is when they get that illuminated feeling or that inspirited feeling, you're in the spirit, in the spiral, right? When you get that feeling of inspiration, we often go to the smartphone or we go to something that distracts us, and then we end up losing it. So as opposed to going to Coney Island, buying a hot dog and riding on the Ferris wheel, pay attention to that feeling of inspiration. Follow it, because you're close at that point. You're very close.
before I see if Jason wants to get in on this, you said a couple things that are important. You see so many people using the term awake. And I've stated for the record a lot of time, I don't consider myself awake at all. I consider myself aware that I need to be much more awake. But that awareness is critically important, because when you get into that state of awareness that there is something more, there is this thing that I can seek for, you do have flashes of what you've called illumination. I have it all the time, and I think to myself, where did that come from? You hear songwriters express the same idea. Well, I was waiting to be inspired, and all of a sudden here I had this song, and I thought, where did this song come from? It's a thing that happens that really you don't have words to describe. I often describe understanding something as false. It's similar to smelling something burning in the kitchen. You hear a word, you hear a single little blurb of something, and you instantly know something wrong with that. You can't describe to another human being what it is or why it is necessarily, but nonetheless, beyond the shadow of doubt that there's no truth in it. There's no ring of truth. And I try to describe it as I smell something burning almost. But Jason, I thought I saw you getting ready to edge in here.
Yeah, well, a lot of this sounds like self-reflection, almost like a meditational kind of thing, or reconnecting to the greater whole is sort of the way it's impressing itself upon me. But when you brought up about the whole de-illumination thing, was Walter Russell aware that there are forces behind the scenes that are trying to distract and, as you said, most likely trying to knock off a whole bunch of us?
Yeah, and I would say, again, there's a practicality to that too. I mean, I would prefer to deal with people as opposed to, interdimensional entities, and we can get into that. I'm not even 100% certain you're even pointing toward that. But as far as forces, yeah, in one of his first recorded lectures in 1952, he was going on about who he thought were the greatest criminals. And he said the greatest criminals in the world are in the United States government. The Russells were pretty staunchly anti-communist, and they had referred to the dangers of communism in several other writings, the world crisis being one, the electrifying power of man-woman balance being another. The scientific answer to human relations, they lambasted communism as a terrible master-slave dynamic that, unless we can go and rise above that, the need for master and slave, we're always going to find ourselves enslaved in that dynamic. I've been on the Unslaved podcast a few times, and Michael Tessari and David Whitehead addressed that to a great degree as well. And I think true spirituality, and this is one of the things that I recently had a little light bulb go off in my head, but true spirituality is a psychological understanding. You have to have psychology being the psyche, which is in Greek, mind and soul, and the ology, the study of. And you could say that spirituality itself is knowing the mind and soul and what it is and what its purpose is. So I think psychology and spirituality more or less go hand in hand. And without a strong psychological makeup and understanding of your own self, your own dynamics, the things that we would call patterns that drag us into dark places, which are many times self-imposed. A lot of us, I can truly say that I've hurt myself more greatly than any other human on the planet has. And it's a lot of work to come back from that. But having that strong sense of self-introspection is something that if every human, let's just say the United States, for instance, would have been a little more psychologically prepared, I don't think we'd be seeing the kind of reactionary evidence, destroying the economy currently and driving 66 million children into extreme poverty. 110,000 businesses, restaurants alone may not reopen. And then 45% of small business in the U.S. may not reopen due to this reaction. I'm a first responder as well, so I serve on 2 volunteer fire departments. And one thing I can say for sure is that reaction is the lowest form of human awareness, where response is the highest. And so being a first responder, this was not a response that the U.S. population was exposed to. It was or made a choice for. It was a reaction. And often with reactions, you end up in more trouble and more danger. So had we had the the strong backbone of psychological understanding of an extent of the population, we would have had a much different response as opposed to a reaction. And when you're reactive, that's when you're highly suggestible at that point. In a response, you're fortifying and choosing a method of how to respond as opposed to a reaction, which can be easily steered off the edge of a cliff by people who understand psychological manipulation, the students of the Bernays of the world and such, which are populating many of our government branches, our bureaucratic systems, or otherwise known as the deep state. And so again, even to say I would just say that having that marriage of spirituality and psychology, which to me is synonymous, you can't really have one without the other. And to be a very strong spiritual person, it's not enough to sit on a rug and meditate 30 hours a day. You have to have an understanding of who you are, and the New Age movement is sort of a infantilization of that strength where, if you just, pray to the Secret movie long enough, you're going to end up in a better position in your life, requiring no action and no work. Now, what the Russells assert throughout their writings is that, thinking without action is basically worthless. So the power of prayer is best utilized if you act. You can have a conference with God all day long, but if you don't act, and, in other words, you can daydream and pray for 80 years of your life that you want to be a great concert pianist. But if you don't woodshed, after 80 years, you can go sit in front of a piano and not be able to play a single song. So all the prayer in the world is meaningless without action to follow it up. And that's, I think, what a lot of the New Age movement disregards is the action principle.
Well, you said a number of things that I think are critical. Basically, what we're experiencing right now is an illusion. And the fuel of that illusion is fear. And it's totally reactive. But you could almost think of the difference between a reaction or a response as a person in a horse-drawn cart. The reactive person doesn't even have their hands on the reins, and words have meaning. What is reins signifying? Where a responsive person who's giving a response has their hands firmly on the reins. Their mind is driving them. What do we do next? What's the next step here? And we do see that what's happened here is a reactive fear has taken over all over the place. But did you finish where you were going there, Jason?
Yeah, I quite agree with all that was said. That makes perfect sense to me. You need to be proactive, not reactive.
Well, you and I have done a lot of episodes that showed where the kind of table started to twist and become unstable in the early 60s because of social programming, which again was putting people in a reactive situation based on illusions and emotions. And the whole New Age movement we've shown, it's actually written into documents from the programmers called the Aquarian movement. And they purposely planned to get people to leave their Western spiritual traditions and to just like grab on bits and chunks of these other things from around the world and do exactly what Max said. Well, what I'll do is I'll sit on this carpet with pretty posters on the wall and a black light. I'll smoke a reefer and I'll pray, and somehow I'll be getting closer to enlightenment or whatever they're thinking. That was all well planned by the people who understand how the human mind works. And we've even covered the roots of that all the way back to Freud. But actually, I'm not even aware. Matt, how many books are available from Walter Russell right now? I have the Universal One, which is, I think, the real main starting point for anyone. Correct me if I'm wrong here. And I have The Divine Light of the Iliad, or whatever you correctly term the title of that book. But how many others are good, valuable books that people could get if they want to know more about this?
Well, there's about some 20 books plus, I'd say. We have a lot of booklets available. The main site for the University of Science and Philosophy is philosophy.org. Again, that's www.philosophy.org. You can find everything there. There's a treasure trove of stuff that since I came on to the university in 2015, we've uploaded and updated, ranging from videos and articles and just a ton of great resources. It's the largest depository of resources concerning Walter and Leo Russell available on the web. including a gallery, information about the museum. And I must also just say, as a disclaimer, I don't speak on behalf of the university when I offer my own interpretations. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions, interpretations, and I just want to make sure that's clarified and that I'm not speaking on behalf of any fire department. But I do formulate my own conclusions through 25 years plus of serious investigative research. And so I would say 20 some books to answer your question. And, every bit of those purchases help to preserve the Russell legacy, which is more or less the motto of my administration. Past administrations have come in and tried to change things to make them politically correct. I changed them back. I don't believe that anybody should alter somebody else's work to be politically correct. That's one of the greatest disservices we can do, especially to such a genius as Walter Russell. Even those that aren't people should leave their work alone, And so basically, any purchases help to preserve the Russell legacy so that future posterity can enjoy these works and their name carry on in history.
Well, I appreciate that frame of mind, and there's a couple things. Firstly, we have copies of the Universal One, so if some agent of the system wants to come in and make things politically correct, I would point out this is the importance of owning one of these books. You can't change what's written in those pages if somebody comes along. And I would further point out that, from my point of view, when people like Russell come up with such big, expansive ideas that other luminaries and geniuses of the time recognize as important, and yet science and the establishment won't accept them. Well, look what's going on in the world right now. You want to know something? If every human being at some early point in school had been exposed to the ideas of Walter Russell, would we be in such a reactive, fearful state based on illusion right now? I would ask. But I'll point out another thing, and we talked about this a little bit before we went on the air, so I'll just kind of overview it because I don't remember exactly. But if I remember correctly, when I first got into the Universal One, Walter Russell had shared his ideas with, I think it was an MD, it was a doctor of some sort. He was so taken aback by what he was presented with that he said, I'll foot the bill to get these books out. Don't even care if we don't make money. It's so important that I'll foot the bill to publish these beautiful hardback books. And they are quality books, by the way. These are the kinds of books you could hand down generation to generation. And these are the books I value above all others for that reason. It's not just some flimsy thing that's going to come apart over time, and what's held within it even more so, important ideas, but think about that. And this is way back in the early part of the 1900s that this is going on. But when other people have come in, I mean, how would, I guess I could see how you could change the organization, but we have these books and the books say what they will. Did people actually come try to change the content that was to be printed?
Yeah, and I'm not going to name names. I don't want to get into a personal tit for tat, but I'll say this much, that there was an organization, past administration, that basically caused a rift in the university, and it was because they had chosen to, unfortunately, reformat and change some of the things that the Russells had written. There were other plans in the air that never materialized, thankfully. And there's a lot of rumor and innuendo too, but ultimately what I've done is, with my administration, is not only we've gotten the artwork out of storage after nearly 19 and a half years in a dusty warehouse, but we've also gone back. We're going back to the original third edition of the home study course versus the fourth. The fourth was basically returning to the first edition and then adding footnotes, addendums, and taking out the double spaces and making it more university textbook-like, which was really the rift that was caused between that administration and the student body. The student body knew that the Russells, one of their main wishes was that all succeeding administrations and student body members, alumni members, do not change a word. Do not so much as change a single word of any of the writings, because, again, people may think they're qualified to edit things, but my analogy to that is, if you look at the Mona Lisa and you were, say, an art critic, and you found it to be unpleasing, which drops of paint would you have removed from the canvas? And And that just comes down to sort of an arrogance. And I think a lot of it's due to that new age idea that, instead of leaving things alone, we should improve upon them by editing them. And I just don't follow that line of that kind of philosophy. It's sort of what we're at odds with in today's world, or this idea of cultural Marxism, and this idea that we should all be the same, and that there's really no, we're all in this together, and that there's no individuality, and that we should all be molded out of the same caricature. And it's ludicrous. Nothing in nature has perfect identity with anything else. Every leaf is different. Every blade of grass is different. Every snowflake is different. And I think there's even been scientific studies. They've spent millions upon millions of dollars to try to find two snowflakes or two blades of grass that were identical, only to find out that each and every single one was unique in its own way. So that's the greatest strength, and that's the greatest kind of diversity, is to honor the differences in people, not to try to make them all the same by culturally critiquing it all and trying to blend it into a blender to make it gray for everybody. I mean, what a boring world that would be, right?
This is kind of the problem with where we are. I've said endlessly that we don't really have culture in the West. We watch some movies, we like some TV shows, but you're addressing one of the side effects of that. Without culture, you don't have traditions. Well, what are traditions? Traditions are things that shook out over time that had value. And so it was decided at some point that we've proven the value here and we'll carry this forward. So if you consider a man who, if you're going to consider the premise here, a man was illumined for some period of time, which implies that he had access to information at a higher level than the vast majority of us do, and then someone else comes in to edit that, then they've missed the point entirely. And that's what gets me about these things. But you mentioned another thing, which I want to delve into for a second. So many people fed up with so many aspects of what it means to be in civilized society these days. So many people homeschooling their children because they don't agree with what the institutions are doing and teaching. And I heard you mention that you actually have homeschooling or online schooling. Can you get into that for a minute for someone who might have an interest? And by the way, at what age does this become appropriate? Is this for children too, or is this for adults? Who's the constituency that might take an interest in the schooling?
Well, sure. I'll first just validate the university's title. It did meet Virginia state requirements as a university, an educational institution. We are a 501c3. So the Russells met that requirement by having a certain number of students and then their own curriculum. So we're not an accredited university, though we do have, the university does have its own curriculum. It's called the Home Study Course. It's meant to be studied at home. Generally, it can be taught to children, but it would probably need to be, leveled to their playing field a little bit more. Though some of the concepts are very universal, the way the Russells present them is more at an adult level. So one of the things I would have liked to seen done is have a children's version of a home study course. Now, that would not be altering anything. It would be simply creating something new as a appendix or as a addition to an already existing teaching. We're not discouraging people from writing their own accounts of something the Russells did, just not changing what the Russells wrote. So ultimately, as a home study university, we do a lot of correspondence, home study correspondence, by sending these courses out to people worldwide in over 45 different countries for the past 71 and a half years. So ultimately, it can be taught with children. It's meant to basically be a study of natural science and universal law and living philosophy. And that's pretty much the premise of the home study course, which is 12 units. It's a 1-year course, and it's meant to be studied over, each unit would be a week of study, so 52 total weeks. And that ultimately, you get a certificate at the end of that. But again, there's no testing. There's no kind of, accreditation. There's no credits to be had or transferred or any of that. But the majority, I'd say, of our student body are people who came out of colleges and universities and were just left desiring something more than what they had been taught. You think of the word university, right? Universe, city. So yeah, it's so ununiversal what we're seeing being churned out of universities, which are little critiquing cultural Marxists who want to basically burn down Western civilization. Well, that's pretty much an antithetical way of what the University of Science philosophy teaches is the unfolding of man's soul, the utilizing of his own inner power to become creative and how to do that. And basically, it's the course is being taught by an artist who not only lived that, but knew very well how to be creative and how to access that inspiration, that very creative potential within himself. And so that's the basis of the entire cosmology and teachings that this university offers. And so for the uplift of humanity as opposed to the control of humanity, and that's one of the great differences between this university and others out there. And there are many great universities out there that aren't into the cultural Marxist points of view, the Herbert Marcusean philosophy and the Marx, that kind of philosophy, which is critique everything, but don't allow anybody to critique you. Is basically, so in that sense, it's like, it's refreshing to know that there are still in existence organizations out there that don't necessarily buy into the communist fascist overthrow of Western civilization, that, the West is built perhaps the greatest civilization that ever existed on the planet. And it's, there's a reason for that. And it's, the great artisans, the great architecture, which we don't see so much of anymore. It's that ability, just like farming, is dormant. It lies within our DNA, and most people have the ability to access it. And again, these teachings help bring out that able-bodied and minded ability within an individual. And the beauty of the Russell teachings is they're cult-proof. There's nowhere in any of them that ask you to get on your knees and pray to a Walter Russell statue. It's all about removing the middleman, the thing that would stand between you and the creator, which is, your ability to access your own conscious vocations and implement those into your life. This is a very hands-on working with the self kind of philosophy. And the beauty of that is it's cult-proof because there's no one that can come between you and yourself. And that's one of the greatest things that I found when I discovered his work that really lured me in was that, wow, for the first time, I'm actually reading something that says I'm the power I'm looking for, not somebody else, and that there needs to be something in between myself and the creator in me. So that's one of the pluses.
There it is, man. And before I tee Jason up here, when you start talking about natural law, universal ideas, universal rights, I'm already banging on the door. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to take some time out this week to go look. I may well take the course. I'm very interested to know more.
I was wondering, just so that folks who might not be familiar with any of this might have something to work with, is there a simplified version we could give of the cosmogony that Russell presented, like a way that we could discuss it to compare and contrast with the normal mainstream philosophy and the way they instruct everybody, really, from preschoolers on up, on how the universe really is supposed to be structured?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I'll just say, concerning the home study course, we're discontinuing the 4th edition, so I would definitely, we're going to be releasing a revamped, I should say, we'll be reprinting the 3rd edition, which is the last one that the Russells edited. So I would make sure to get the 3rd edition. We do have that available at Amazon as an e-course. Again, all that proceed helps to preserve the Russell legacy. So the 3rd edition will be reprinted. I would definitely, if you're going to get the print edition, try to get the 3rd edition. You can go to dowsers.com. They currently offer the 3rd edition. The university is basically, we're going to have a fire sale on the 4th edition and eventually reprint the 3rd. But with this whole mess of having to shut down, a lot of the things that we had planned to do are now sidetracked, unfortunately.
Matt, before you address Jason's ideas, will you show up under the full show and comments? I'm sure people are going to ask questions and want links. So I know you have an account. I just wanted to get that in so that people understand that you'll show up, and I'll email you. And I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead. You can.
No, that's fine. I'd be happy to.
Jason's ideas.
Yep. And concerning here's your basic introduction, what the Russells taught, what Walter Russell's illumination gave to him. And he had no special interest in science at all. He hadn't even read a science book prior to his illumination in 1921. But he ended up drawing all these charts and graphs, hundreds of them. And basically what it amounts to is that he was to deliver a new science to then scientists of the day that was a two-way motion universe as opposed to a one-way heat, death, dying, explosion only universe. And you can simply look at nature and see that nothing in nature explodes to come into existence. I mean, you can't really count a volcano, which is the result of perhaps thousands of years of compression to equal that explosive force. But basically, the idea that the universe just exploded from a point of nothing is not only an impossibility, especially in a two-way motion universe, but it's highly improbable.
Proven impossible by a law that we call thermodynamics, by the way.
Yeah. The discrepancies are in and throughout, and basically what we had in around the year 1910 to 1930 was an overthrow of the philosophy of idealism, which basically you could call it creative intelligence. You could call it the whole philosophy of materialism is what rules the science of today. The materialist idea is that there must be this, basically everything must align to the senses. And the problem with the senses is that they can only detect things that are expanding or exploding or moving away from each other. The ability to detect compression or the inward flow of the wave of creation. Now Walter Russell proposed that there was this thing called the wave, and to understand the wave is to know the secrets of the universe. Well, the wave moves in two directions, to crest and trough and back again. And so it's cyclic. It's a repeating cyclic universe. It's a holographic fractal optical universe, as opposed to reductionist heat, death, exploding universe made of particles. And so basically, carbon would be the God particle in Russell science. Carbon is the perfect balance of the wave. It's ironically referred in the atomic structure as the 666, the 6 electrons, 6 neutrons, 6 protons, because it's the perfect balance of the wave of creation, the balance between male and female. And that's the point at which the wave begins to be expressed in nature, is what we would call hydrogen. And you can even see how materialism took, if you research spiral elemental charts, you'll find that back in the early 20th century and prior to that, there were many scientists who had spiral charts of the elements. And it just happens to be Mendeleev's two-dimensional reduced table that becomes the foundation of all science. And so I think right there you're seeing, as opposed to moving forward into three-dimensional alchemy, they decided to drive a stake and drop the anchor in the two-dimensional world. That's again an unfortunate side of the philosophy of materialism, is because what you're doing is you're basically chaining man to his senses. If it doesn't meet the strict requirements of reductionism using the senses, then it must not exist. So again, your two-way motion universe is the inhalation of all bodies and the exhalation, where materialist philosophy says that basically there's only explosion. And that's how we got this ludicrous idea of a Big Bang, which happens to be a Catholic interpretation of the origin of the universe. And it was Monsignor Georges Lemaitre who said that he proposed the Big Bang theory. And the Pope Pius XII, basically, he gave Lemaitre the thumbs up and says, this is a validation of the Catholic faith. Our Jesuit priest, Georges Lemaitre's theory, is a validation of the Catholic faith. So there it is. I mean, you could go into more and more, but another interesting thing, since we're on the topic of the Universal One, is that Pope, I can't remember which Pope it was, might have been preceding Pope Pius, might have been Pope Pius, but he basically had his underlings write to Walter Russell and This is an interesting note. This is why Walter Russell never reproduced, in my opinion, the Universal One. He never reprinted it. He was basically given a summons, an issuance of decree by the papacy that he was not to republish that book. Or, it was a threat. Or you would basically, and there was, you didn't need to write what they would do. Just basically, he understood it. He even said this in one of his lectures. He said, I was basically, and people can disappear. People can disappear, have their livelihoods, completely eradicated if you go against a papal decree. So he was more or less threatened not to reprint this book.
Well, that should tell everyone listening that you need to just take a break from what you're listening to right now and go ahead and get the Universal One. The Masters of the Dark Universe tried to stifle the information here, which tells you on the face of it that it must reside in the light, because the Masters of the Dark Universe, they're not offering light, are they?
No, I don't think they ever have. A colleague of mine referred to the church as the armpit of evil on the planet. And, in some cases I can agree. But ultimately, when you have a two-way motion universe, you understand that all bodies breathe in and all bodies exhale. It certainly explains quite a lot that why is it that we make exploding engines and you lift a space shuttle into the air and it creates a toxic cloud of gases and fire and explosive potential and explosive force and effect, whereas nature can lift 300-foot tall trees into the air, the redwoods, for instance, and generates coolness as she does it. Nowhere in nature do you see explosions happening to create life. So again, I think when you have a two-way motion universe, you can ultimately line it up to your own body and see how you have yourself two hemispheres, a left and a right side centered by an equator. Your left and right side breathe in through your nostrils and the two become one, and you exhale heat from your equator, just like the planet breathes in through the two poles and exhales heat from the equator. And this is ubiquitous throughout nature. And the great thing about it is it's spiral. That's the first picture in the Universal One, is a spiral. And what you're seeing is, the spiral nature of the elemental table and how it creates all structure on the planet from the inert gases, which are very close to the equator, through the unfoldment of spiral motion through a +1, 2, 3, and ultimately culminating at the crest of the wave, which is planetary formation and body formation, not just in cells, but in all of nature. So you have the spiral motion in the DNA all the way up to the largest supercluster galaxy. And so that is the ubiquitous way in which I call the spiral the creator's signature. That's how God signs his creation. And you want to see the signature of God, just find a spiral anywhere in nature, and they're everywhere.
So I should insert something here. So
Sure.
many people discovering that they're not about the NASA models anymore, and they're challenging it, and they're coming up with new ideas, or maybe they're old ideas. But the point I would make is, in many of the models of the people who have challenged the NASA universe, the way supposed space works, almost every body, what I call lights, are moving in a spiral motion. So for all you FE folk, Walter Russell has something for you. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't get lost in descriptive language here. These spiral patterns are key in the things that so many are looking at. But we're at about 50 minutes, so we're going to wrap up here the hour one and queue up to come back and do hour two and blow a few things open. Jason, anything you want to get in to the end of the hour here?
Well, I had just started reading the Universal One, just got past the preface, unfortunately, so I don't know that much yet about all the subject matter. But even what I gleaned from that, and then just looking over the biography of everything Russell had done, this is really great stuff, and I hope folks do take the time to consider it. And I love the fact that it seems to make so much more sense and integrate the concepts of science and religion, kind of pulling them both back from their extremes and giving you something to work with that makes a hell of a lot more sense, in my opinion.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that struck me is the other thing that I had been up to my eyeballs with was the periodic table. By the time they were getting to Berkeleyium, Einsteinium, California, I'd had it. And I said, somebody needs to challenge this, but I'm probably not the guy because I don't know enough about the what I call artificial science backing it. But I knew, and I was going to prep up to make myself a little more aware to be able to challenge this. There it is. Walter Russell, what's he do? He says, look, periodic table might be better described in this way. Matt, we're going to wrap up hour one. Is there anything you want to get in? And actually, since we are wrapping up, why don't you tell people where they can either find the material or you, whichever way you want to go at it. If you don't want to provide direct contact, I understand it does get overwhelming, but go ahead and tell people where they can find things or yourself if that's what you choose.
Yeah, sure. All things Walter and Lael Russell can be found at philosophy.org. For my personal contact, you can hit mattpresti.com, mattpresti.com. You can find me on YouTube as well. I've produced over 139 videos, much music, poetry, documentaries, things of that nature. And that's about it. You can also find me on Facebook.
All right, that brings hour one of episode 215 to a close. And one more thing I'll add into hour one, Matt's actually going to give me an intro to the chief science officer of the Russell Foundation, or the university we've been speaking about. And that will allow us to engage a little more deeply in the kind of, I guess, what we would think of as the scientific nuts and bolts of what it is that Russell laid down. So I'm excited for that. In hour two, we're going to get into a heck of a lot more. And I hope people take the time to go look at what we're laying down here. We've come up in a country, well, let me go at this a different way. How many times have you come to listen to Crow and hear me say, I go for all these old books before the modern edit? And I used to say early 1900, you know where I draw the line now? And you can count the ways all you want, 1911. If it's before 1911, I want that book. I want to preserve it. I want to hold the Universal One or anything printed before 1911. Because in fact, what we saw was this switchover into this illusory kind of make-believe world where theories were going to rule the day. And whatever they could get the human mind to believe in, that's the way things were, brothers and sisters. Like right now, did you know that if you touched your wife, you could die? That's going on right now. And it's all an illusion. Come join us for hour two of episode 215 over at crow777radio.com. Crow777radio.com is the only Crow site. There are at least 2 fraud sites, though I do believe PayPal's about to smack them down. So join us at crow777radio.com for hour 2 of episode 215, covering Walter Russell. Cheers.
enemy of knowing.